The world is saved. The living room's dark, save for light being cast from the big TV screen and the imminent sunrise that's teasing the one starry sky with whispers of morning.
Hey, George.
Hey, Lions. How's it going?
Dude, my soul is ablaze.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Or is your soul blazing, if you know what I mean? Maybe you picking up one laying down? Yeah,
So
good.
if you think it's both. If you if you think soul
It is on fire and high as hell right now.
That's why it doesn't care about the first one, because of the second one.
Because it's going to be high as a kite by then.
Ooh. If you think Soul Blazer is a weird name for a game, take solace that we could have had the original Japanese name, which is Soul Blader, like Blader. I don't know what that means. And I know that I've only ever heard Soul Blazer for the last 30 years, but Blader just sounds wrong to me.
I think Soul Bladers are what produce Blade Runners.
I mean, yes.
Or Blade Runners produce Soul Blader. I forget. Chicken and the egg kind of a situation, I think.
Yeah, it's cyclical. One and then the other. It's like a reverse metamorphosis. Like butterflies get back into the cocoon, then they come back out.
Yeah. It's like an Ouroboros where the snake eats its own blade.
Neat. So there's no way I could logically segue off that, so I'm just gonna walk away quietly.
Come back.
So we played Soul Blazer
for the SNES.
For the SNES, which is part of a series of games from a company called Quintet. And it was produced by Enix, which later got bought by Square Enix. And this matters because we're going to talk about some things in the visuals and the audio. And it helps if you know that this game was made by the same company that made ActRaiser. And it helps if you know that they purposefully reused a bunch of art assets, audio assets, and thematic assets. Can themes have assets? They do now. So, so I could imagine going into this game and like not knowing that, one, it was by the same company, and two, that they absolutely did this on purpose, and being like, this is weird. Why does this feel so much like ActRaiser? And I think it's important to know that they did it on purpose, because otherwise you would just be like, oh, are they super lazy? Like, are they just
right?
Are they just like, is this palette swapping like across entire games?
Yeah, no, it's it's kind of like if you didn't know it was by the same company, you would assume that it's the person that like walks into a dinner party and like is like, ooh, this is nice. I live here now. And like it's like slowly like pocketing all of your stuff, or it's like the Simpsons episode where Homer, or when Lenny gets the new big high def TV and like Homer just starts living there. Yeah, it's that, but video games. But it's okay because it's Lenny that's doing it, not Homer. So
yeah, it's Lenny in Lenny's own house, and Lenny didn't do it by accident. Lenny did it on purpose.
Exactly, because Lenny know how we do.
But I want to make sure I say 1992 was the year for this. Mm-hmm. And that matters to me because when we get to the visuals, I'm going to be not like wildly effusive, but like a little effusive. And when I noticed the year, when I was, getting the show notes ready, I was like, not every game in 1992 looked like this. So that I'm kind of impressed by the year, but hey, we'll get to that. So,
yeah. So, no, I mean, I'm sure you were very. I mean, it was a great year. I mean, you had just turned 12 and just learned that you had just learned your mother's maiden name, which was what again?
There's a long running joke of you telling me your social security number, and I can never remember the punchline. but it's one of my favorites.
Oh, right. No, I remember it was 1-800. No, wait, that's
Nope.
the phone number.
1-800 Ask Gary. So my man, we're just like all over the place. So it's because I'm high because of that joke you made earlier. My nostalgia goggles.
Yes, there it is. It's all on purpose. It's definitely not ad-libbed or by accident. This is entirely scripted.
Yes. Yep. My nostalgia goggles for this game are also drug related, actually, now that I think about it. Yeah, no, I have a segue for this.
Nice.
So before I actually knew Brian, my father and his father worked together. And they, would talk about their families. And it was like, oh, I also have a kid about that age who's also like super into video games. And for whatever reason, because I was young enough that I don't actually remember how this started, probably because my dad was tired of taking me to rent games at the Blockbuster, Brian and I started sending games to each other through our dads. So like I would put a game, like with my dad's stuff, and he would take it to work. And then like Brian would send a game to me. And then eventually we met and we became friends. And a lot of what we did was play video games together. But the reason I say that this actually can segue off of like buying pot from someone is because, and I live in Colorado. So if I have ever imbibed marijuana, I was able to do it legally. But
at the state level.
Well, I don't go to the White House and blaze.
You should, though. It's a real rush.
I'm going to go sit right in the center of the Supreme Court and just be like, hey, you 9 people seem cool. So,
Holden?
You're all cool with this, right? So,
did Holden Caulfield come to the party?
At least 5 of you are cool with this, right?
Because that's all I need. Like the other 4, I'm less concerned about.
But so we didn't always have like the boxes for our games because we were kids. And so a lot of the games got passed back and forth in unmarked brown like lunch bags, like the kind a wino would really obviously conceal a cheap bottle of wine in. So I actually did have Soul Blazer delivered to me in a way that you would deliver pot to someone clandestinely and didn't even know as a child how hilarious that coincidence was. But yeah, that's my experience for this game, is taking it out of a paper bag and being like, yay, Soul Blazer, and then enjoying the ever-loving crap out of it.
Yep, and my nostalgia experience for this was non-existent. And to be fair, though, this was one where... you said like, oh, we should play Soul Blazer. And I was like, oh, well, I haven't played it yet, or I haven't played that before. And you're like, oh, well, it was from the same people that made ActRaiser. And I was like, okay. And you're like, but it's like an action RPG. It's like Zelda. And I was like, oh man, it's like Zelda. Like you said, that is all I needed to hear. But I mean, that's like saying like, oh man, like raindrops on roses and whiskers on kittens are your favorite things. This is just like that. And then being like, oh yeah. And then it wasn't, like it was raindrops on daffodils, which isn't bad. It's just not Legend of Zelda.
Yeah, I mean it's like Mega Man is a great game, Super Mario Brothers is a great game, and they are both, for all intents and purposes, platformers, but they're really different platformers. Yes. They employ the themes and mechanics of their universes in really different ways to tremendously different effect. And I'm not surprised that I wielded the sword of "It's like Zelda" a little too brazenly, because what I should have said is it is a top-down action RPG similar mechanically to a game like Zelda.
Yes. Or like, I mean, it's just kind of like how, like Metal Gear Solid is like, an action RPG, and Ocarina of Time is an action RPG, but Ocarina of Time is clearly better. Yeah, in every possible way.
Didn't we just recently discuss swords versus guns and how that works out for the swords people?
Yeah. I mean, actually spectacularly in Bushido Blade, but eventually... after I got shot enough times.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, top of the hour visuals.
Yeah, I'm not even gonna pretend on this. I love these visuals so much. Not just because the artwork is good. I mean, I like the style of the artwork and I appreciate the quality of the artwork, but this is also it's thematically appropriate in a way that a lot of games I don't think always nail. The main character is not like a giant muscle bound late 80s early 90s action hero. He sort of looks like a kid. Like you would believe that he's like 12 even though he's an angel essentially sent from heaven kind of. But he doesn't look like, oh my god, like I want to be him. He's He-Man, right? Like it's
right.
But he's also not going for the gentle, also kind of, 80s, like David Bowie, like, gender bending. He's just like some dude. And that really matters to the theming of this game. And like everything is alive. So like doors and tulips and stuff. And we'll talk about all of the impact that has mechanically, but I love what that does to the visuals because these are inanimate objects that you wouldn't normally have a conversation with. And so the ones you can talk to, like they kind of like dance a little to like let you know they're alive, which isn't Kirby dancing. It's not like charming AF, oh my god, please never stop dancing. It's just this really subtle way to communicate to you like this thing has this little spark of life in it. And it just makes a fairly sparsely populated world, right? Like a lot of action RPGs, the towns are not full of hundreds of people, right? This is not Skyrim where you could follow a dog around and see how it lives its life. Like the world is fairly sparsely populated, but it makes the world feel very alive that all of these things literally are alive, but they're like communicating it in the way only life can, right? Like I think it's an old, probably bastardized version of a Zen koan, like to be moving and supple is the way of life, to be still and stiff is the way of death. Like, yeah, the way I know this door is alive is because it's like kind of shaking its hinges a little bit. It's like, oh, I can talk to that door. It's jamming.
It's just dancing. It's just dancing a little bit. Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with that. And I think that having a fairly life protagonist is very important because it does kind of further drive home the theme that their power comes from. It's a guy. Protagonist gendered?
He is referred to with a pronoun a hand.
Ooh. Is the protagonist gendered? I can't.
I bet in the book and on the box they might refer to him as a him, but I actually don't think they do in the game because
I don't think they do either.
The very first thing that happens is the master asks you for your name. And then I think you are exclusively referred to by name. So yeah, actually I don't think that they are.
So quick aside, what did you name your character?
Okay. So every time we play a game where naming the character or naming something in the universe is an option, I always, like, without even thinking about it, like I'm on total autopilot, just name myself Lions. And then halfway through the game or sometime later while I'm playing, I'm like, why don't I ever do funny names? Why isn't my name? Why am I not Butts? Why am I not
Seymour?
Yeah, why am I not Fanny? Like I've played this game 1,000 times. Like I know I can take a little seriousness out of the story. It doesn't have to be, it's me, I'm in the universe. Like, but I always do. I'm such a coward.
So you know what I named my character?
What?
Link.
See, that I appreciate because that's way more clever than just naming yourself like Bastard, but with some letters removed because you don't have enough space.
Yeah. No, I was just kind of like, I was like, what should I name my character? I'm like, Link, because it's just, I don't know why. Like I just got kicked. It's like Link, we really need you to do thing A. I'm like, man, I saved Hyrule and now I got to come in here and like save this town too. Or maybe this was like the birth of Hyrule because we don't count Skyward Sword and like, maybe who knows how this fits in, but now it's in the Zelda timeline for me. But I think so. Anyways, to go back to the beginning of this aside, which is that I believe that the fact that the main character Avatar is Lithe points to the fact that their power does not come from physical strength, right? It is power like given to them by the heavens and absorbed through the world around them, right? Which I think is again important thematically. That they aren't some hulking He-Man that towers over everyone. They are a kind of a representation of the median of life, of what a human would look like.
Well, and
so
you also never. Not that I can't think of any time in the game you see any other humans fight with any of the demons. And anytime it's referred to in the story, the demons win handily. So having this servant of the master, what do they call them? I used to live up in the sky like you, even though I don't look like it. Because you meet other people
until I took an arrow to the knee.
Exactly. But like you meet like the little mole, and one of the doors in Dr. Leo's lab used to live up in the sky like you, right? So you see other heavenly, we're just going to call it heaven. You see other heavenly creatures, but they have very earthly forms, up to and including random crap made on Earth, like stuff that was, manufactured. So to have this person look exactly like all the other people, but show up with the power of the gods, so to speak, like it matters thematically, right? Like you are there in service of the master. You're not a random human who worships the master and who is fighting in the master's name. You are literally an angel, basically.
Yes. And also to speak to the overall theming is basically I really felt that there are two things, but that the character models, both for things in the world and also enemies, were very extremely varied and very enjoyable and entertaining. I thought that that it created, even though a lot of the monsters behave the same way, which we'll get into in mechanics, I thought that, it did create an aspect of like the discovery aesthetic, which I really appreciated, because, when I would enter into an area that looked different, which is another thing, right? But like I'd enter into an area that looked different, I would be like, ooh, what kind of bad guys are going to be in here? And I really enjoyed that, because it did create that kind of drive to discovery, like just the sheer novelty of what the new enemies were going to look like, and the new things that like when I would enter a new area, I'd be like, ooh, what I'm going to start unlocking stuff, like things, people, places, all that sort of stuff. So it's like, and when you start, it's very, very barren. So, when I went into the first area, I was like, oh, cool, it's like a village with buildings. And the second time I'm like, ooh, this is like a druid area. And it's like, ooh, it's underwater themed. And it was really enjoyable to have that aspect of discovery with the amount of varied visuals that they had.
Well, and to your point, the varied enemies then go on to release varied parts of the new town area, right? So you don't show up to a town that's already populated and it's like, oh, please go out into our version of the local wilderness and destroy our local monsters. You show up to basically wallpaper, right? Like here's the backdrop for where the town was and will hopefully be again. Now go out into our local wilderness and destroy the new exciting monsters you've never seen before. And then you'll get to see new exciting parts of the town. So like they unfold together, which is it's hard to talk about the way the visuals play off each other without constantly segueing into mechanics. But like it's a really maybe not completely unique. There are probably other games that have done a similar-ish thing, but it's a fairly unique thing to say, like, you discover the town, which is like your safe haven, and the wilderness, which is where you go out to fight monsters, basically in parallel, right? As opposed to crossing through the wilderness to get to a town, you discover the town all at once, and then you cross through another wilderness to get to another town, because that's how most RPGs are, right? You have these little bastions of safety that are towns and save spots or whatever, and then the wilderness between them. Whereas this is like, no. You basically show up to the wilderness, and then by discovering new monsters and new parts of the wilderness, you discover the town, right? And it unfolds in a super visual way because everything is literally not there until you release it.
Well, and it's very interesting because there's a lot of stuff that does directly kind of relate to the plot. You know, like you unlock things that then allow you to move forward, but there's a whole bunch of stuff that you unlock that nothing to do with nothing. You know, like the guy on the bridge, you just walk up to him and he's like, "Oh, I'm not going to block your path anymore," and like moves out of the way. So I was like, "Oh, well, that's purely there for world building," which I think that they do very well. But it's very interesting because I feel that it is mechanically very similar to like almost like themed loot boxes in a way, you know. And I know that everybody likes to crap all over loot boxes, but this would be loot boxes done right, which is ones you don't have to pay for, right? It's not, but basically is that the idea is it's, for example, in Overwatch, like they'll have an event where it's, Chinese New Year. And then when you get loot boxes, it's all like, Chinese outfits and all this sort of stuff.
Oh, yeah. Something on brand.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of like that, where you're just kind of like, ooh, this is the Druid loot box area. So you kind of like go through and you slowly unlock all of these things. You're like, oh, I unlocked, a badger. I unlocked a tree. I unlocked this, And again, if they all were directly in service of the plot, it would feel kind of grindy. But because, some of it's just literally stuff that you unlocked where it was just kind of like, oh, I opened this box and I got a bunny. And the fact that each of them are, you step on the pad and it unlocks the creature, right? It does have that kind of same feel of it's like, ooh, what am I going to get when I unlock this pad? It was a bunny. Maybe this bunny does something. Maybe it doesn't. Who knows? But I'll go back and find out. So it creates an interesting mechanic where you go and you get excited about the new thing that you're going to get. And then not only do you get that immediate reward of being excited about the new thing that you're going to get, but then another build of suspension of what's going to happen when you then get back to town and get to interact with it. So it's a very interesting tension or excitement and release cycle, which I enjoyed.
Yeah, and I'm trying to think while you were endlessly rambling back there. I mean, contributing valuably. I was trying to think
you don't know me, and I'll say I run and stuff.
Are there any other games where you discover the town? And I can think of a few where like you build up the town, right? Mm-hmm. Where it's like, oh, you defeated monsters, now invest money and you can unlock this shop that previously was closed because the monsters destroyed it. But I can't think of any other game that I ever played where it's like, no, the town is gone. Like there's nothing, or there's either nothing there to begin with, or it's hidden, because of demons or whatever. And I kind of like not showing up to a brand new town and I'm like, okay, now I have to go in every building and talk to every NPC, because as you unlock NPCs in the town through exploring the local wilderness, sometimes you need to stop what you're doing and go back to the town and talk to them so you can continue exploring the local wilderness. And other times you can go for a while before you have to go back to the town. And then you show back up at the town and you're like, oh, there's all these friggin' people. Like, I don't even remember all the stuff I unlocked. And it's like, you get to go around and be like, hey, I saved your life. You're welcome. Congratulations. Right. I really, it feels like a very smartly paced way to dole out, like, here's a new area. We kind of want to control the rate at which you explore it. And that kind of thing happens with the wilderness all the time, but it doesn't often happen with the safe areas of the town. And I kind of really like it. And the fact that it's done in such an obviously visual way, it's not like all the people disappeared in the frickin' Rapture and you have to go into empty houses and be like, okay, is there somebody in this house? What about this house? Like, literally the house is gone. There's nothing. And then when you release it, it tells you like, oh, Link released a tulip, Link released a goat, Link released, a bridge guard, right? So you know exactly what just happened.
Yeah, there's two games that I can think of. I cannot think of any game that does this. There's two games that do things similar, but they both... Well, so one of them is serving a different mechanic. So like, and there's a lot of games that do this. Like, for example, Darkest Dungeon, where when you show up to the town, most of the town is not operational, and you don't like pay to unlock anything. It's just like, but as you play the game, different buildings become populated and unlocked. But that being said, that's a tutorial mechanic. You know, they're like,
Right.
we're not going to throw all these buildings at you at once. We're going to give them to you one at a time when you can actually do something with them.
Yeah. And you can see, like, oh, there's a church, there's a blacksmith, there's a library, whatever. So like you kind of have an idea what the end portrait will look like.
What
once
it's going to
everything's-
look like.
Yeah, once all the colors are filled in.
And the only other example I can think of, which would be even a little bit similar, would be like Fallout 4. You know, where you can
that
go
actually I have
and
to take
like.
your word on. I skipped that one.
Oh, did you?
Somebody
Well,
told me it was super combat heavy and less about the narrative, and I was like, well, that's what I was here for, so thanks for saving me $60.
Well, hey, you get a feed every level, so or do you?
I'm not doing that again.
For those listeners not familiar with that, last time I got to slap the hell out of Lions for getting one of those wrong. No, this is true. Yeah, so no, but in that game you can go out and like get people to join your village, and you can build your village. But it's not that like by like talking to this person you then come back and something's like been built, you know. So it's not. It's again, it's in the same league, but it is not the same ballpark.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, it's a different, it's a similar, and I suspect visually it's pretty similar, right? Because like there aren't buildings, and then later there are buildings, right? So it populates the world in a way that's obvious when something isn't there, and then it is there, and it's the size of a freaking building. But I do like how integral that visual is to the story and the gameplay unfolding, right? It's not optional. It's not like you could say like, oh yeah, I'm not going to unlock anything in Soul Blazer. Like choosing not to unlock things in Soul Blazer is choosing not to play Soul Blazer.
Yeah. One thing that I didn't. This is a minor thing, but it and I may have just missed something in my review, but I didn't feel that the dungeon crawls, you know, that the different levels on the dungeons came together very well in the same way. Because I mean, obviously, I'm going to compare this to Link to the Past, right? You know, in Link to the Past, it seemed like the different levels of each dungeon all felt like one giant dungeon. Especially the thing that Link to the Past did that I felt pulled all that together is that you could sometimes interact with floors, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So you could fall from like floor 5 onto floor 4 or what have you. In this one, it felt like when I went like up or down a floor that the floor looked different enough that it was always on theme. Like if it was a fire theme, it wasn't like I was suddenly underwater. But like, you know, it seemed disjointed enough that it didn't always feel like I was kind of in the same area. Like I would go from being in a place where it was like kind of rocky and craggy to a place where everything's on fire to a place where everything's super on fire, you know? And I was just kind of like, I didn't really feel that I got, you know, that kind of cohesive feel that it's all one area, you know?
Yeah, and I don't totally disagree with you, but I think some of that is that you are exploring the world near a town, not like an architected dungeon that was built by whomever, right? So like a good example is the maps to me all feel very different, and I don't know that they actually are, but I can say for sure they definitely feel like it. So a good example is in the first area, it feels incredibly linear. Like you are just walking from point A to point B. There's no branching paths. There's virtually nothing off to the side, which is good because it's like the tutorial area, right? They're trying to like keep everything focused. The mermaid town, we're going to call it Atlantis. Atlantis, the thing that...
Lost City of Atlanta.
the thing that I struggle with every time I replay this game and I get to that area is I don't think that area is actually any larger or smaller dramatically than any other area. But the way it's laid out is you leave the town and you're underwater, and then you go like up and left, and then you come back through the main area and you go like down and right, and then you come back through the main area and then you go like up and right. So like there's spokes coming off of this main like hub. And because you're passing back through that main hub, it makes it feel like it takes forever. Like,
so just for the record, that the water level, the water temple
I
is
know.
what is that though?
I
It's
don't
always
know.
it was. I mean, look, if there was one thing that solidified this for me is it was Mickey's House of Illusion. You know, like the fact that game had a water
Wait,
level
was
and
that
it was
no?
the
We played World of Illusion.
World of
World
Illusion.
of
Right.
Illusion. Yeah.
We didn't play House of Illusion. Because...
Castle of Illusion. Castle of Illusion. World of Illusion.
World of Illusion.
Yes.
Yeah, we played World of Illusion. World of Illusion had a water level, and it was the absolute worst. And like Ninja Turtles for the NES has a water level, and it's the absolute worst. Why? Why, Lions? Why?
Because humans are not meant to be underwater. And when we are, the one game that has water levels that are tolerable? Echo the Dolphin.
I disagree. I think that all of the water levels in Echo the Dolphin are intolerable.
Well, then we are truly lost. if Echo the Dolphin couldn't get it right.
That's probably why Echo the Dolphin sucked so hard was because they were all water levels. You know?
So if it had been Echo the some kind of animal on land, but the same everything else, the same mechanics, the same game design, the same music and everything, even the weird aliens at the end, but you'd been on land instead of underwater, would have been fine.
I mean, I literally have no evidence to say that would not have been a 5-star game and like one for the ages. I mean, it was, I don't know who made that. I think it was owned by Sega. So it eventually would have, Echo would have gotten some like dark gritty enemy with a gun. But, I think that Echo the Echo would have been fine. Yeah, no, I put it to any of our listeners, like, please tell us a game that has a water level in it that's good.
Yeah.
Because
good is the operative word there. Not tolerable, not better than most of them, but actually good.
Yeah, actually good. And when compared to like the rest of the game, like is on par with the rest. Like, so for example, you can make the argument that like there are some Mario water levels that are good, but they're still the worst part of that game.
Agreed.
So it's like, yeah. So I mean, like, yeah. I challenge our listeners. Gauntlet has been thrown.
Yeah, no, about this at NoGogPod on Twitter, or there's a contact form on the website. Yeah, so the water level feels long and laborious, which is, because it's a water level. Of course it does. But I don't know, like you remember in like old Nintendo Powers, they would show you sometimes like, oh, here's the entirety of a Mega Man level, or here's the entirety of like a Castlevania world or whatever. Like, I don't actually know if the levels or the areas in Soul Blazer are dramatically different size, or if they just feel like it, or if they're dramatically different layout, or they just feel like it. But the Atlantis in particular, I'm confident feels dramatically different because of this like X you draw across the hub, and it just makes it feel like it takes for freaking ever. The other thing that Atlantis does that I will crap on the visuals, because I think I basically have close to no complaints about the visuals in terms of like their prettiness, like as an art, except there was a time in history, apparently it was around 1992, when people weren't really positive how they wanted to animate water in video games, because you can do that a bunch of different ways, and it depends, like, is it underwater? Is it the surface of the water? Is it the surface of the ocean? Or is it a river, right? And there's enough variation that people went and did lots of wacky stylistic things. I don't like the way they made water look in this game, because it looks fantastical. Like, that's not how water moves. It just doesn't look right. It's never looked right. And in the World of Evil, the very last area where you go to fight the final boss, they have like this swooshy fire effect that's everywhere, and it looks really cool. And it is the exact same animation pattern that they use on the water, except it's reds and yellows and oranges instead of like blues and whites. And it's not a full palette swap. It's not like they just took the water and turned it into fire, but it's the same like flowy ribbon of color animation. And on the fire, it looks super cool and like otherworldly. and evil. But on the water, it just looks like the moving walkway in an airport. Just like what is this blue arrow pointing me in this direction? I even remember thinking it looked odd as a kid. Like it has looked odd to me for 30 years.
And I think that what you just said is something that would be the line that kicks off Act 2 of a movie, where like a character would come like running in, like gasping, and be like what happens? Like they turn the water into fire. Okay, I'd watch that. Like if that was like part of the like a preview, where it's like, boom, in a world where things have happened, boom, like one person will stand out above the rest. What can we do? How can we stand against them? They turn the water into fire. Shh. Mega Man X 20 XD6 or whatever. I don't know. But
there was a perfect opportunity to say Soul Blazer, but Link
I'd say
is
go back
the
and
Soul
fit in.
Blazer, right? I mean, it's right. Like you had it.
Yeah, no, it would have been great. Yeah, I did. I messed it up. And I'd say let's go back and edit it in, but we have too much journalistic integrity for that.
Part of me is tempted to tell you I'm going to do that and then let you do a second take and then leave all of this in.
You're like, okay, so we're gonna make it look really good, right? Oh no, man, it's gonna sound great.
It's gonna be great. But yeah, so that is like the one part of the visuals that I would say like flat out looks like, just in terms of pure aesthetics, I just really don't like. Now, when it comes to the graphics serving the gameplay, there are two things they do visually that I have feelings about, not good or bad, but that specifically stand out as like drawing a raised eyebrow. One is you encounter metal enemies, and those enemies cannot be defeated with your regular sword, or actually even the best sword. There is one specific sword that can kill metal enemies, and they mostly communicate that information to you through the sound, and there's only a tiny little visual change, which is that they don't do the white flash of taking damage.
Right.
But because this game occasionally has some frame rate issues when there's a ton of crap on the screen, you could be wailing on a metal enemy for a little while before you're like, oh, it's not flashing, right? Like if you have the sound down really low or something, because the noise is super obvious and dramatically different.
There is actually one additional visual cue, though, that I think, again, helps assist it. This isn't perfect. Like they probably could have drawn more attention to it. No life bar appears for the enemy.
Ooh, that is super true. Because the life bars are not persistent. They show up when you hit something, and then if you don't hit it again for like a second, it goes away.
Right. So when you swing on those things, like no life bar appears unless you're actually damaging them. And I know that because when I actually took a swing on one and dealt the damage, I was like, they have how many hit points?
Yeah.
But,
no,
yeah.
that's fair. The other thing is when a monster comes out of the monster lair and they spawn, they are temporarily invincible, and they flicker. They're like, they look, semi-transparent to, I guess, communicate to you that they are invincible temporarily. And again, most of the time, or if you've played this game before, that is perfectly fine information. But if you're in an area that has a lot of monsters, or you're not doing your job and you're just letting them continually spawn and the frame rate slows down a little bit, sometimes they can get stuck on invisible, or they get stuck on visible, and it looks like, oh, I should be able to hurt them. Why can't I hurt them? Or I'm getting hurt. What is hurting me? And this extra matters later because there are actually some invisible enemies.
Right.
So like taking damage from an unknown source is actually a thing they expect you to deal with later in the game. So it's like,
right.
It's kind of it's not game breaking, but I do remember like when I first booted the game up and I sat down and like was kind of taking more damage in the first area than I thought was strictly reasonable for someone who'd played this game so many times. I was like, oh yeah, because I'm too much up on them, because like I know what's supposed to be happening and I'm not waiting long enough for their invincibility to wear off. Like I need to kind of hang back, which any normal person would probably, proceed with caution. But I was like, nah, I got this. I'm the Soul Blazer. Like, this is fine.
Yeah.
And then I
not Soul Blazer.
Yeah, the Soul Blazer.
And actually, that leads to one of my thoughts, which was, and this is okay. This is just a total minor aside, but like invisible enemies, totally fine. One of the things that they do with the invisible enemies is they continue to leave the shadow down.
True.
Right. Which is a great way to telegraph. It's a great way to kind of be like, ooh, it's invisible, but look, you can still see it. So it's a way for you to still kind of like jockey for position, but it makes it basically a little bit harder to see and harder to deal with. So, I thought that was very nicely done. Here's the thing, is if it's invisible, how is it casting a shadow?
Yeah, it's about the laziest way you could be like, oh, there's still an enemy over here because of its shadow, but it's
light's
invisible,
passing
though.
through it.
Yeah. No, I'm actually with you on this. Like, I think a ghostly,
it's very pedantic, but
a ghostly outline or like a shimmer, like, oh, there's little sparkles where there's invisible enemies because of the magic that makes them invisible, right?
like Predator thing, like
Yeah,
where it kind of does
like,
yeah.
And I mean, graphically, like processing wise, for a game that does occasionally have frame rate issues if there's too many sprites on the screen, like, I don't think a little shimmer or a little outline or something would be any more intensive than rendering the whole sprite, right? Like, we're talking about rendering less information. So yeah, leaving the shadow feels like they want you to notice the hardest thing to notice, which is just this little black circle that's, you barely might even be able to see it moving around. But it doesn't take much thought to be like, but it's their shadow.
Right.
I'm with you. I don't feel like that's too
nitpicky,
too minor of a nitpick. I think it's like, really, the shadow, like, no one said like the shadow.
Yeah. Like, what? And I mean, it's kind of like the same thing where literally I was playing through and I was like, oh, it's an invisible enemy, but you can still see their wait. It's kind of like the same thing where it's like, like, oh man, I'd love to be invisible. It's like, but you'd be blind. Wait, what? Like that. It was like that kind of same realization. I was like, yeah, no, hang on. What? Like yeah, because I mean, invisibility is one of those things that is like highly romanticized. I mean, like, what was it? You had oh man, I'm gonna blank on it. The guy who had the big boat and the golden fleece. What's his name?
Hercules?
No, Jason. Right, Jason and the Argonauts. Right.
Oh, Hercules had. Did he have the lion skin? Jason
Hercules
had the golden fleece, I think, and Hercules.
Yeah,
I
and
think
Hercules
had
had the dead wife.
Jesus Christ!
And children that he killed because it's Greek mythology.
Yeah. Because if you thought anything about Kratos was original, you're wrong.
But no, but I mean, like, like where there was, the thing that makes you invisible, and it's like, oh, well, do you become a terrible person? And I think I might be getting those myths mixed up. But anyways, that's not the point. Is it's like, oh, being invisible would be awesome. It's the same thing. It was like, oh man, being able to move at super speed would be awesome. It's like, well, yeah, except for the fact that the friction would set you on fire, and the whiplash would break your neck, and so invisibility is one of the things where it's just kind of like, oh, well, they cast a shadow. No, they wouldn't, and you'd be blind. And how would you like interact with it's a whole thing.
Yeah.
But
no, I always assume that any superhero who only has one superpower has two superpowers. Their second superpower is that their first superpower does not kill them. And
right, which
right?
No, that's actually a big one with super strength, because like, I assume that when people are like, oh, I have super strength, I'm like, then you must have improved durability, because if you just are like, oh man, I have super strength, so I just punched that guy with like the same amount of like energy as like 5 TNT blasts, it's like, then you just pink misted your arm.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah, because
like,
that blast also hit you.
Yeah, exactly, because of Newton and stuff. But that's kind of all I've got for visuals. Do you have anything else? I've got other stuff, but nothing really worth remarking on.
I could say more, but why? I need to throw a big thumbs up to the bosses because the enemies are all somewhat varied, right? Like in each area, the enemies are varied, but within the area, you see the same enemies a lot. But I do really appreciate and enjoy that each boss is completely unique. They have completely unique movement patterns. They have completely unique looks. They have completely unique powers. They're all like big, right? So they're like large, super detailed, really interesting sprites. And I would always rather take less game, right? Like this is one thing I've noticed about action RPGs is action RPGs compared to like JRPGs tend to be less aggressive with things like palette swapping and reusing towns and making you backtrack through the same place like 47 times because an action RPG is usually about 10 to 15 hours and a JRPG is like 40 plus. And so it's hard to make 40 hours worth of game where you never see the same thing twice, right? But like 10 hours worth of game. And if I'm going to fight 8 bosses, for the love of God, do not show me the same boss palette swapped later in the game. Like that is unacceptable. You only have to design like these 5 or 6 bosses. Like just make each one unique. And because the areas are so varied, make them thematically appropriate. And this game does that in spades. And I appreciate it. Oh, another thing is none of the bosses are just large regular enemies. Like,
Yeah.
right? Like Yoshi's Island does this on purpose as part of the story. And there it's really cute. Like, oh, it's a regular enemy, but now it's huge and it's a problem, right? But like when a JRPG is just like, oh, it's the same wolf you just fought 1,000 times, but dire.
Bigger.
It's
Bigger
dire.
and with frosted tips.
Yeah, it's bigger and dire, and like some of it that was white before is like red now, and that's how you know it's mad, right? And like, I mean, I love JRPGs, but like, I would, given the choice, broadly speaking, if someone's like, do you want to see the same thing 100 times, or do you want to see 6 different beautiful things? I'm probably gonna go for 6 different beautiful things. So I like that about this game is that the variety feels like when they ran out of stuff, they stopped instead of just reusing the same stuff.
Right. Yeah. I mean, instead of saying, hey, we need more ink for our, printer because we got to print more pages. And it's just kind of like, well, but you had enough ink to print these 10 pages. And isn't that enough? No, man. More ink, more pages. And it's like, I don't know. But audio?
Yeah. And what I should have done was made my comment about the metal enemies. This is where if we did heavily edit these episodes, I would take that and put it here because I mentioned the sound effect that it makes when you hit them.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's what we should have done, but the best laid plans.
And it's unfortunate that we're not, reviewing Chrono Trigger again because then we could have like gone back in time and fixed all of this.
Right. I was talking to someone who was like, oh yeah, I listen to your podcast, and I was like, oh, it's cool. Like they're like, yeah, I'm a big JRPG fan, so like I've loved those episodes, and it was like, oh yeah, did you notice the thing we did in Chrono Trigger with like the time travel? And he was like, oh yeah, you played the time travel sound effect, and I was like, no, we didn't just play the sound effect, we traveled through time. He was like, what do you mean? I was like, oh, the episode's like it's out of order, like it's like a joke because like we normally do segments in a certain order, and he was like, oh my God, you're right. Cause like you made a joke in one segment and you like referred to it later. And I was like, yes, it was maybe a little too subtle.
Yeah, no, actually I've talked to a couple people about it as well. And they were like, oh man, that's so awesome. I'm like, yeah, but if I had to explain it to you, then you have to explain the joke. It's not funny. So, and that's on the joke teller. So
the good news is I've never spoken to someone who is like, why is that episode out of order? That was stupid. Like they didn't pick up on the detail, but then not get the joke. They either always get all the way there or they don't get there at all. And that's fine. Like someone who doesn't even realize it's happening and just thinks it's a normal episode, totally fine. But anyway, in this episode, there's these metal enemies. And when you hit them with your sword, which is a visuals thing, it makes a different noise. So let's talk about noises now.
Let's talk about noises. All right, I don't know, and I am really confident I made this exact same comment about ActRaiser. And, if we had that Chrono Trigger time machine. No, this isn't about Chrono Trigger. I swear to God, some of the sound effects for this game are straight out of Gradius 3. that was made by Konami. I don't know whether like the NES
Yeah.
had like just some like basic sounds to it, but that Metal Scorpion dude, when he fired fireballs at you, I was like, this is exactly what it sounds like when you're shooting bad guys in Gradius. Like I would slap bet on it. I'm just so sure.
Mm, Gradius.
Well, you don't get to
Fire.
research it first, and then,
No, I'm not
like,
going to slap
decide
bet with you over it. I'm just like, this feels like the thing. There's 8 million videos of people playing those video games on YouTube, so I could like quickly enough fact check this. So I'm just curious because this game uses a nearly identical sound palette to ActRaiser and to the games that followed. So after Soul Blazer is Illusion of Gaia, and then Terranigma, and then I think there's one more. But so like all of those games, if you play them, they're not similar sounds, they are identical. And the later games have more sounds because there's like more magic and more weapons and whatever, like more stuff in the universe. But like the sound you make when you get hit is identical between ActRaiser and Soul Blazer. The sound it makes when you swing your sword is identical between Soul Blazer. Like it is literally the same sound file. And as someone who played ActRaiser and Soul Blazer a crap load of times, I am going to tell you with absolutely no shame that I did not notice that until someone else pointed it out to me, right? I felt it. Like I felt, oh man, like these things have so much in common. But somehow I just never was like, oh, they're literally the same sound effects copy pasted to create a through line of continuity of, you know, pieces of art produced by this studio. Yeah, someone had to spell that out for me. And then once I heard it, I was like, oh my God, duh. Like how?
And that's really interesting because one of the things that I've seen a fair amount of in video games in general, and sometimes it's very good and sometimes it's very bad, which is stuff that is, quote, in service to the brand, right? So a great bad example of it, which I believe I'm stealing this from Extra Credits, and those guys are awesome, so go check them out. But basically, it's like if you look at BioShock, right? So when you in the first BioShock game, you go through like garbage cans and things like that to like loot stuff because it's in this fallen society where, you know, like it's pretty crazy, right? And then in BioShock Infinite, where you were in the fully functioning, flourishing town of, you know, you
Sky
still,
Atlantis.
yes, Skylantis. When you were there, they still kept the looting mechanic of looting through garbage cans, you know, and that makes way less sense. Because, you know, like if all of a sudden, you know, like you're in this post-apocalyptic world and I see somebody rooting through a garbage can, I'm like, yeah, that holds up. If I'm like driving down, you know, like 470, you know, I just like kind of like look over and I see somebody like in normal, like in a suit, hungrily like scrummaging through a garbage can, I'd be like, is somebody going to do something about like that
person clearly
wrong.
Needs some assistance.
Right. So, but the thing is, it's a BioShock game, so you got to have looting through garbage cans, right? But the thing that I think that is the idea is that it has to feel like a BioShock game. So this is an interesting way to service the brand in a way that is almost, as you just said, unrecognizable at the top level. Right? Because you didn't know that this was, you know, the looting mechanic, like straight up, you know, hard pulled from BioShock. You didn't know that these, you know, you couldn't just say like, this is the exact same sound effect. It felt like the same game. So it was in service to the brand in a way that was unobtrusive by just improving the game feel, which I think is very elegant.
Well, I feel like this is the way people often describe movies, is they'll say like, oh, you can tell this music was done by Hans Zimmer because he just has a hard-on for cellos, right? Or, and I made that up. I don't know what he has a hard-on for.
Yeah, or you can tell like this was made by Michael Bay because there's giant Transformers testicles, you know?
Yeah,
like,
just everywhere you look, right? Yeah. And that kind of thing is more, I think in service of the brand is the pejorative way to say a company's signature or an artist's signature, right? So like if you watch a Michael Bay movie and I mean, he's not a good example, but like there's a lot of explosions and a lot of like grandiose over the top nonsense, right?
Do you think the big reveal is that Michael Bay is actually Mr. Torque? From 'Cause I'm just picturing like Michael Bay saying like, "I got one question and one question only: explosions."
Well, I think it's the opposite. Is the big reveal in Borderlands 3 will be that Mr.
Oh.
Torque is Michael Bay.
I could definitely be down for, and I'm sure, I don't know if you remember. Do you remember Mr. Torque's last name? Because Mr. Torque is his first name.
Oh God, what is his last name?
Yes, he was named Mr. Torque Flexington. Is his full name Mr. Torque Flexington? And I would buy into that, like the big reveal being he's like pulls off a Scooby-Doo mask and it's Michael Bay. I'd be like, that makes sense.
See, if you're gonna do something that's like bald face in service of the brand, like comedy is safe, right? Because everything in Borderlands is totally just banana pants, but it's supposed to be. Like the brand is nonsense and they pull it off in spades. If you're trying to do that with things that are serious or dramatic, but also they really want you to know the production studio that made it or the director that made it, right? Like if imagine like if in every Spielberg movie there was somebody wearing a t-shirt with ET on it, eventually you would be like, yes, Spielberg, we get it. You're very successful. And it would be annoying. But when you watch a Quentin Tarantino movie and there's like over the top blood and gore, it's like, well, it's not really gore. It's just blood. Like over the top blood spray. It's like, oh, that's like
violence.
Yeah, that's Tarantino's signature, is this like kind of stylized hyper violence, right? And to do that in a video game, because we're now like 4 levels of analogy away to do that in a video game with the sound palette, which I don't know if the right word for that is palette, but I really like the way it feels. So I'm going to run with it. So to do that in a video game with the sound palette creates a kind of cohesion that is almost always going to be subtle and overlooked by most players, but felt, right? Musicians or people who work in the audio world, that kind of thing is probably more obvious to them. But I would say most players probably fall on the George side of the audio spectrum, where they appreciate good music and they enjoy rich sound effects, but they're not like dissecting them, right? They just kind of wash over you. And if most players are in fact on that side of the spectrum, then creating a cohesive signature through audio is very likely to be felt, but not very likely to be consciously detected, which is clearly what they were going for. They wanted this sort of subtle tone throughout their games.
So do we want to just set the George John spectrum, like John Williams, George, like ability to kind of like observe? I mean, I don't know John Williams personally. I just know his music, but I assume that'd be pretty good, like of like, you know, complete troglodyte to true expert. And before you answer, palette, a thin board or slab on which an artist lays out mixed colors, the range of colors used by a particular artist in a particular picture, or the range or variety of tonal or instrumental color in a musical piece. Boom.
Nobody can see it, but I'm doing a little Lions Was Right dance right now.
Yeah. I was surprised at how naked the dance was, but it works for you.
I mean, are there other ways to dance? Is this why I keep getting thrown out of clubs?
And emphatically not thrown out of others? Yes, probably.
Yes, but only certain clubs.
Yeah. And in other clubs, like you're the regular and they give you nicknames. Yeah. Yes, this is why.
So I need to mention about the music, and I think I've had this problem with a couple other games, but I love the music in this game. The Water Temple music is not the best, but I do enjoy that music. But I love all of the music in this game, and this game has a problem that a lot of games from this era have for me, which is that my 2 favorite pieces of music in this game are pretty unhummable. So if you try to hum them because you have them in your head, anyone nearby will look at you like you are a crazy person. For example, earlier this evening when I was like, oh, I need to organize my notes, like I had them all written out, but they weren't like chunked into sections. I was organizing my notes and kind of like da-da-daing the song, because I mean they don't have words or anything, so I was like singing one of the songs, and then I became intensely aware of the like what is wrong with you look that Susan was giving me sitting
Nice.
across the table, and I was just like, these songs are not hummable, okay? Like it's stuck in my head and I want to get it out by like performing it, but it's like it's not meant for vocal performance. Like I don't know what to tell you. It's not like the Super Mario Brothers theme where you could easily whistle it. And I just that's a crappy kind of earworm because it's like a song I really like, but when it gets in my head, I'm like, all right, it's in there. Don't know how I'm gonna get it back out because the only thing I can do is go and like listen to it on YouTube or play the game, I guess, because it's not like the soundtrack for these games exists.
No, I'm confident that if only we had a time machine like in Chrono Trigger, then we could go forward in time to when soundtracks for them did exist.
But sadly, we do not.
No, sadly, this is not Chrono Trigger. This is Soul Blazer. And all this is true. Yeah, I actually also really did enjoy the music. And Megan and I actually got into a conversation of it where she said, she's like, "Oh, I really like that they used classical music." And I was like, I think this is original music, and it is in fact original music, but it is very reminiscent. Some of it is very reminiscent to like classical pieces, and so it was interesting from my seat because at one point Megan started singing random classical songs
to see if they lined up.
Yeah, and so I'd be like, why do you have that in your head? And she's like, because of the video game, but I don't know that song, and I know this song, so and I was like, yeah, but
you know
but
what
I
that
did
is?
feel
That's the super nerdy version of like, oh, this album totally lines up with The Wizard of Oz, and if you play it at the exact same time, right, like. And it's like, oh, this classical piece is exactly like this other song in Soul Blazer. And it's like, you nerd.
Well, the awesome thing about that is it is on conspiracy theory level because no one's going to fact check that.
No.
Like, I mean, if you said like, dude, just so you know, Bach's Symphony in D minor totally links up with stage 3 of Soul Blazer, everybody's just going to be like, oh. And I mean, they'll judge you, but they won't check you.
Yeah. Even if you showed it to them and you were like, no, here, listen, it'd be like, okay, I hear it. Also, how did you get into my house?
Yeah, no, I mean, to be fair, they would check you for drugs, but they wouldn't check you socially,
What's in that brown paper bag? It's just Soul Blazer.
I swear to God. So, do you have anything else for audio?
I do. There were two things I wanted to ask you about because they're really subtle. And so it's one of them is
no to both then.
Well, no, I mean subtle, like literally if your volume was down too low, you could miss this. So when you go into dreams, because you can go into dreams, and there's a couple points in the game where you talk to people there's text description on the screen that is not speech. And so I think the first time it happens is actually right in the beginning of the game. So you go into Lisa's dream, and yeah, it's literally the first time you go into somebody's dream. You go into Lisa's dream, and she is calling out to her father, Dr. Leo, and she's like, answer me. Like, why won't you answer me? And then it says, I think there was no answer. But what matters is all of the text in this game, like most games from this era, has a text scrolling noise, like as the letters appear on the screen. But when it says there was no answer, it is silent. And then later in the game, when Dr. Leo blows himself up, if you try to talk to Lisa, it says something like Lisa is racked with grief or something because her father just died. And I think it might, if it's not that text, it's text that happens in that scene, but it's the same kind of thing where there's a bunch of spoken text that has the text crawl noise, and then some very weighty, crucial, dramatic text that does not have the text crawl noise. And it's so subtle and it's so unimportant. Like, it doesn't change anything, but if you notice it, or if the volume's up loud, so like if you feel the difference, like where there was sound, now there isn't sound, like it's very impactful. It's very clever because they had to design the 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 part of the game engine that puts text on the screen that they could denote those things separately, right? This text does not get the noise, all the other text does.
Yes, no, agreed. I did not notice. I didn't notice that, but again, to the cleverness of the audio on this, um, I felt it. Like it would just kind of go through and like brr, 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 and then like nothing, and it makes it feel like the words hang there. And yeah, I did think that was I would not have been able to point that out to you, but now that you're saying it, I was like, yes, and I think that that's a good example of the use of null sound, because it a lot of times when there is no sound, when there normally is it should be kind of deafening, and it really does, like, that uncanniness makes you focus in on the moment, and it does make the text isn't any bigger, it isn't bold, it isn't like rainbow colored, it's just the same text, but without the sound, it feels heavier, which is very nicely done.
Yeah, there's one other. It's a little bit less subtle. You may have noticed this, but after you defeat the boss for an area, there is permanent happy music in that town. So all of the completed areas have the same
music.
town music, but only once the boss is defeated, which creates an interesting through line, because before the boss is defeated, the towns have the same like sad town music, and then after the boss is defeated, the towns all have the same happy town music. So it makes the areas feel a tiny bit less varied because every town has the same town music, but it does create this very clear, this area has been liberated, like time to go and save more of the master's subjects, right? And I like that sense of finality, like, okay, like you did what you were here to do, time to move on, right? And that fits again thematically with this universe is and the Quintet games in general is like you did what you were here for, and it's kind of okay for you to leave now. Like you're not now a citizen of this town, like you did your job now, thanks, bye.
Right.
And that the music kind of like pushes you forward, like things are happy now, go somewhere where they're not happy, go find sad music.
It's kind of like I forget the name of the character. He's played by the same guy who played the villain in the Doctor Strange movie, but from Serenity, the guy who plays like do you remember the movie Serenity, right?
Yeah, I mean, I do, but not well enough that I'm getting where you're going with this.
No, because it's he basically he says, like he's like to Malcolm, he's like, I'm the villain. I cannot exist in the perfect world I am trying to make, So it's like, and he goes like he's like, don't you see? Like I am trying. I have to exist to do all the evil things so that way other people don't have to do them. And Malcolm says like, like I don't kill women and children, and he goes, I do. So that's obviously like an evil version of it, but it's just kind of like the, I don't get to live in this perfect world that I am making, because that's not my job. My job is to go make the world and then move on to the next thing, So which I think is again very thematically appropriate, very similar to ActRaiser and the kind of theming that it does. So again, very, very much so agreed and very much so on point.
So I'm going to use that as a perfect jumping off point to Controls and Mechanics, because in Controls and Mechanics, I can also talk about the story. And in ActRaiser, and I know we talked about this on the episode, but it's just like, it's still like, I'm still shook by it. It's just so good. Is in ActRaiser at the end, the little angel, because you are the master in ActRaiser, and the little angel that's sent to help you, but I don't know sent by who, says like, oh, nobody worships you anymore, so you must need to like go back to your celestial rest or whatever. Wouldn't it be great if one day they never needed you, but then I guess you'd never wake up, huh? And like the angel basically says to you like, things can never be perfect if you are needed. the fact that anyone ever needs you means that things aren't perfect. Which would you want? Do you want to continue to exist and experience the world, but it's an imperfect world where people are suffering? Or would you rather not get to exist, but the world you leave behind is perfect? And that's kind of the theme of all of the Quintet games, is just like this sort of melancholy, it's not a fairy tale ending, right? And at the end of Soul Blazer, you defeat evil and you freed everyone, and everything seems like a fairy tale ending, except you go back up into the sky, and Lisa, who's like one of the first people you meet, who you somehow fall in love with. The middle part of the game is kind of story light. Most of the story happens at the very beginning and the very end, and then it's just a lot of world building in between. But you're back in the sky with the master, and the master's like, "So you're still thinking about that human Lisa, huh?" And you're like, "Yes." Where you actually have to like say yes. And then the master's like, do you think you're going to be able to forget her? Or like, do you want to go back to Earth? And then it's like, hey, yeah, I want to go back to Earth. It's like, okay, I can make you human permanently. Like, you just looked like a human before. I can actually make you into a mortal, but you will have none of your memories. She'll know you, you won't know her. And then because I mean, this is how the story ends. You have to do this, but like, you choose to go back to Earth, and you appear in like the field where she is, and she's like, "Oh my God, it's you!" Because you've been gone for like 4 years at this point, and she's like, "Oh my God, it's you!" And it's a silent protagonist, so he's like, "Yeah, it's me," and she's like, "Do you remember me? You don't look like you remember me." And then I actually got into an argument with someone about this because we couldn't settle on whether or not this was well executed or totally hackneyed. It makes you answer her. So it says, "Do you remember me? Yes or no?" It doesn't change the ending. I think there's only a tiny bit of text that's different if you say yes or no. But this is mechanically an interesting moment because the designers want you to experience the melancholy of this moment, like in a dramatic irony sense, but they force you to choose how you're going to answer her. Do you, the player, lie to her and tell her the truth because you, the player, remember her, but you know the character doesn't? Or do you, the player, represent the character and tell the truth and say, "No, I don't remember you"? And it's like the impact in the game universe is so incredibly minuscule, but the impact in the chair, the person holding the controller, feels overwhelming. It's like, oh my God, do I lie to her or not? Like it feels like such this weighty decision because you've chosen to come back to Earth, but you don't know that you chose to come back to Earth because you don't remember any of that.
So, but what if instead you, the player, are the person that the protagonist, right? You, the player, are the person that the protagonist was locked behind the lost memories, right? So when you are saying, like, when you're sitting there, like you the person are either screaming in their mind at the top of your lungs, like, yes, I remember you. So that way the protagonist goes, yes, even though like they don't, but that's the knee-jerk reaction. Or do you, the player, knowing that, that basically all the memories and all that this person was ultimately will die and go to sleep forever, as they did in ActRaiser, that you should simply answer no and kind of like let yourself and those memories die?
Yeah, it sucks. Like, it's an incredibly heavy, and I've talked to other people who've played this game and ActRaiser and the other Quintet games, and I'm like, oh yeah, like the endings of those games are so heavy. And some people I've talked to are like, oh yeah, I mean, it's like an RPG ending, and I'm like, then no. Like, no. It's one thing to say like, I didn't think it was that big of a deal because like the translation was really bad and I just couldn't get into it. Or like, oh yeah, he lost his memory, but obviously they go off and fall in love again. And like, so it's still kind of a happy ending, right? Like the people who've blown me off, I'm just like, you could not have been paying attention and feel that way, because you would either be as shook as I am, or you would be able to explain why you didn't think it was that big of a deal. But to just be flippant, like, oh yeah, it's just like a fairy tale JRPG ending. It's like, no, it's not that. It's definitely not that one. And the fact that you said that makes me wonder if you ever even played video games?
Well, I think that ultimately the philosophy behind ActRaiser and behind this is strong, is because the idea is it's like, because I mean, again, you as the avatar, you as the person, like you go around and then you are no longer needed in your role. So then the idea is that person, the servant of the master, is no longer needed on Earth. So that person can't be on Earth. This new human can be, but that new human is a new human, right? So that's the choice you have to make. But I think that the interesting thing is the philosophy behind, if you come into a world that needs you, if you do your job right, when your job is finished, when the world doesn't need you anymore, because your goal shouldn't be to carve out a niche for yourself. So that way you are constantly working and fluctuating. Like, it's like, what if I could create a world that's better and better and better to the point where I've taught people so well that they have become so self-sufficient and so self-sustaining that I'm not needed. And I think that it's definitely a very non-Western philosophy, which I think is really fascinating. Okay, there's one mechanic that I definitely absolutely want to touch on.
All right.
There is no knockback in this game for when you hit bad guys, and that is
when you get hit,
or when you get hit. Here's the thing. So here's the thing, is that
I got to be honest. I had a few inklings about where you might be going. This one wasn't it, but
really?
Now I'm like, yeah, this does consistently rile him. So maybe I just my instruments were not tuned.
So the two problems with that was, one, to me, is that it does change the game feel, right? So when you hit something, it doesn't feel like you're hitting it. It doesn't feel as solid, right? It doesn't feel like you're hitting something and interacting with it. It feels like you're passing your sword over it, right? And now, to be fair, the bad guy does stop for a minute.
Wave my magic death wand over you.
So the bad guy does stop for a minute, but then he keeps coming, right? So basically, you have to just spam the to hit button, right? Okay, so that in and of itself is fine. But here's the thing that to compare it to Legend of Zelda. So Legend of Zelda, which does have knockback, right? So when you knock the bad guy back, it knocks them back in kind of a random direction, right? I mean, it can't by definition be random, but it's nuanced enough that it kind of just knocks them in whatever direction. That makes combat more kinetic and more engaging, because the thing is, then you are constantly jockeying for position around this person. The issue that I had with the way that combat played out in this particular game was that with every bad guy spawn location that I came across, right, because it's AI and the AI is relatively simple, is that it wasn't a matter of the bad guys are spawning out of this location and I totally have to just destroy them all because I'm the servant of the master. It was, where do I need to stand relative to this portal so that way I can just sit there and spam the B button until everybody walks into my human meat grinder and dies. And
yes.
So once I realized that, I was like, you can make the argument for that being a more tactics-based game, where it's just like, the goal isn't to have this, like, amazing, adventurous, like back and forth swashbuckling thing. The goal is to find that location,
Right.
But that being said, I don't know for sure that was their intention. And I was really amazed and impressed with how much tweaking that one mechanic. It's like, well, enemies don't get knocked back. And you're like, and now combat is wildly and forever changed.
Yeah, no, it takes a lot of the action out of action RPG when and you cannot move while you are swinging your sword. So you really, to get good at this game, to get good, you really need to learn to say, like, okay, this enemy is going to be invincible for this long and travels at about this speed and does this thing right after they spawn. So I need to stand over here and then just press A until they die. Right. And that's, it's not fun. Like, it's not fun combat. Like I enjoy this game a lot because I love the universe, because I love the story, because I love unlocking the towns and the world. The combat is not fun. The combat is the hoop you just have to jump through to do the other stuff.
Right. And it's actually an interesting kind of point to intrinsic versus extrinsic rewards, because the thing is you're playing, the reason why you're playing the game isn't because, like, assuming, like, so combat's like the 70% of it, like, as far as like actual game time played, you know? So it's actually an extrinsic reward system, because you are playing the game because of the things that are happening outside of the act of playing the game that you're enjoying. And you're enjoying unlocking the world, you're enjoying, you know, seeing the new monsters, you're enjoying all of those sort of stuff. But the actual act of playing it, the actual act of combat, is pretty drudgerous and kind of time consuming.
Yeah, it's a chore.
Yeah, it's a chore. Yeah, and so the two other things that they did to exacerbate that is that once you do find that perfect location, the bad guys just keep spawning, right? So then it's literally just like, I found the right location, and now I just have to stand here for like 20 seconds, you know, and just do nothing and hit A until all of them are done, and then I get my extrinsic reward of what is the new thing that I unlocked, you know. The one other what?
Oh no, I just like I'm just thinking like how that must look without nostalgia goggles is like, because to me, like, even though I've seen the towns unfold 1,000 times, like I've gone through this pop-up book with my 5-year-old 1,000 times, I still delight when the castle expands from the pages, right? And I'm not considering like, yeah, but for some reason we keep that book in a locked container up in the attic, and the ladder to the attic doesn't work right. So I have to go into the garage to get my ladder to get into the attic. And then I forget the key. So I have to go back downstairs to get the key to unlock the box. Why am I going through all this just to see this little pop-up castle? Ooh, pop-up castle. I agree 100% with how utterly boring this chore is, but I will play this game again.
Yes, and that's true. And when you're getting your ladder out of the garage, make sure that it's a DeWalt ladder, okay? Because Warner ladders are complete crap. All right,
and anyone who says otherwise can go straight to
hell. And all this is true. So one of the other interesting differences in combat, because again, you can't help but to compare it to Legend of Zelda, you can't move diagonally.
No, you can't.
So that's another, like, one of those minor things that, you know, it's just kind of like if somebody said, we're just going to do Legend of Zelda, you're like, all right, great. Legend of Zelda combat is super engaging, super enjoyable. It's like, no knockback, and you can't move on a diagonal. And you'd be like, well, I mean, as long as you keep everything else, I mean, that should be fine. But because you can't move on a diagonal, right, that means that you can't, like, kind of turn and kite an enemy very well, you know? Like, It makes it a lot more difficult, like, when an enemy's coming at you, for me to, like, run away from him and then, like, turn a quick, tight circle around and, like, nail him from the side as I, you know, like ducked, and, like, the dust, like, flies up around me and all that sort of stuff, right? Which then further drives home the idea of you need to find the spot where they're not going to get to you, you know?
Yeah.
Because there was definitely a couple times where I was like, oh, I'm going to duck and weave and move. And to be fair, I did look at a walkthrough, and it can be done, but I was watching the person do it, and I was like, ooh, no, I'm not that skilled. Like,
because what you do have that Link only has when he's charging his shot is you can strafe. You can just hold down the shoulder buttons and strafe. So you can't move on a diagonal, but if you want to create space without changing your orientation to the enemy, you can do that by strafing, but it's clunky. It's not great. Like, it's a pretty awkward way to move through the universe. And having beaten this game literally probably a dozen or more times, I can tell you that I use strafing in like a couple of specific spots for specific reasons, and every other time it's not the optimal solution or even a fun solution. The optimal solution is find the spot where if you swing constantly from here, they will die in the meat grinder.
Yes, and then I'll stop picking at this wound, but this brings me to the overarching thing, which is something that game designers I now know more so to look out for and still completely fail on, which is players will optimize the fun out of your game.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, like, basically players will find the optimal way to play the game and they will play it that way.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter whether or not it's fun. So it would have been way more fun for me to try to duck and weave and move and all this other stuff. That was not the optimal solution. The optimal solution was to wait for the bad guy to spawn and walk all the way to me, take a couple swings at him, and then kind of jockey and see if I could get position a little bit closer, and then take a couple of swings. And then once that solution hit, I was golden. And I just sat there and I just hammered away at him, which then, of course, made combat very unfun, but it was optimal, And so, like, yes, I am to blame a little bit in the fact that I wasn't I went out to, like really, really enjoy, this fun outdoor activity day. And that first thing I found was the pogo stick, and I hate the pogo stick, but I just didn't want to try anything else. So that is to a degree on me, but don't put the pogo sticks right by the door with a giant sign that says pogo sticks are super fun. And then everything else 100 yards away, Yeah.
No, so it doesn't forgive, bad combat or bad design in a game that's so combat heavy, but this team is not awesome at designing combat mechanics because you can tell that they broke from some norms on purpose. Like, experimentation is not something Quintet was apparently afraid of. And I respect that, right? Even though it doesn't always work, that's the nature of experimentation. But they're also not amazing at it because the combat in ActRaiser is shockingly bad, like almost game-ruiningly bad. And it's the same kind of thing where there is one and only one ideal solution, and everything else is either not a solution or is so much worse you would never actually consider it, right? Like, once you get the star stream magic or whatever the hell it's called, like the shooting star magic in that game, that is how you solve every problem because it solves every problem. Like, why would you ever do anything else? And ActRaiser has the same, or Soul Blazer has the same kind of issue where once you learn that, distance from the monster layer that's going to maximally kill them, that's where you stand. I do think that I don't know if they were thinking like, oh, well, it'd be interesting if you had to strategically find that location. Like, I don't have enough evidence to say they were definitely thinking about that level of complexity or it, from that angle. I do know that they were thinking about how your attack was related to the way you move, because the arc of your sword swing is huge.
Yeah.
It's like 270
large,
degrees.
Man.
Yeah, it's friggin' gigantic. And where the sword lands actually affects how much damage you do. So, like, a good sword swing is better than, like, a grazing sword swing. And it's not so dramatic that you're like, oh, man, I just barely nicked him. But it's dramatic enough that when you were trying to find that optimal position, I guarantee you were subconsciously making sure they were dead center in the sword swing because that kills them in the fewest number of swings. Whereas if you were just clipping them with the very end of the gigantic arc, which you could realistically do because the arc is so huge, it would not be the optimal solution. And as we just, beat to death, you are kind of forced into having to find this optimal solution because it sure isn't fun.
Correct. So that was one of the things that I noticed, and just this is kind of an offshoot on that, is one, the first boss that I thought was completely unbearable. Like,
it's terrible. It's honestly almost experience ruining.
It like literally, I got to that point and I almost texted you and said, like, I do not wish to play this game. Like, let's pick a different game or something else. Like, I almost didn't get past him. I looked up a wiki on how to beat him, and then, like, literally I did 2 iterations of what it told me to do, and I was like, oh my God. And Megan was kind enough to actually time it. It took a full 5 minutes of mind-blowing monotony of just, like, going up and tagging him and coming back down, and going up and tagging him and coming back down. And I was like, this is really, like I got him about a third of the way down, and I was like, I don't want to be here anymore. Like, it was really bad. And so then also too, that makes the entire game feel, and I don't know if this is intentional or not, but it makes the entire game feel slower paced because you feel like you're in less control of the pacing. Like in Legend of Zelda, if I want to just blaze through a dungeon, I can. It's not a great idea. Like if you're not really good at it, you'll probably get your balls rocked. But I can do it if I want to. In also not in ActRaiser, but in Soul Blazer, you really can't do that. So it does make you slow down a little bit, which I don't know enough to be the opposite of what you just said. I don't know enough to say that wasn't intentional.
Yeah, I mean, when you consider the theming of the universe and how they want things to unfold at a certain pace, making the pace of the game so obvious to the player where you are really aware, like, okay, defeating a monster layer takes about this amount of time, and I'm super aware of the amount of time that's passing because doing that thing is more like a chore, right? Like I can't really say for sure that it was a design accident. It may have been like, we want this to feel like you are slowly wearing down the horde, right? The horde is not really that big of a threat to you. You will get through them, but it's a thing you have to do. Like every, once in a while, you have to suck it up and get up on the step stool and clean the dust off of the fan blades. Like it's boring and you feel like it's a giant waste of time, but it's just, you got to do it. You got to mow the lawn. You got to, get that last little bit of grease off of the baking dish. Like, even though the rest of the dish is clean, like, oh, is that last little spot? And like, you're super aware of the time involved and you just do it. And based on the way the story is and how all the stories are in all the other Quintet games, I think you could make a case that it's not an accident. I don't think it's a great experiment success, but I don't know if I would say it's an accident. I think they tried to control pacing through very strictly timed combat, which, if you don't have anything else to say about that, actually segues into one of the mechanics, because I have a whole bunch of different mechanic things that are like, oh, this is interesting. But there's one in particular that I wanted to make absolutely sure we discussed, because one of the main things that makes this different from a Zelda-like is that you have levels, right?
Yep.
You gain levels, you get more life through gaining levels, but you also actually, that might be it. Do your stats change?
I don't know.
I don't think any other stats change. You just get more life.
Because you do more damage and get more defense by changing your weapon and armor.
Right. But the reason I thought the way they handled experience in this game is really interesting is in a Zelda, you get more life by beating dungeons, right? And in certain parts of the map, there are extra hearts that some of them you can get if you're just clever. Some of them you have to have an item before you can get it. And then you also need to be clever because you have to like go and dig it up or whatever. In a game with experience, when the amount of health you have is tied to the level your avatar is, that opens up the possibility for grinding. Except you can't really grind in this game because there are a fixed number of monsters, and once you destroy a monster layer, they're gone forever. But every world, every area has a handful of monsters that respawn every time the screen loads. But the unbelievable chore that it would be to kill like 3 monsters, walk off the screen, come back, kill those 3 monsters again, walk off the screen, come back, and to grind that way would be, no one would do that. No one in their right friggin' mind would do that. There is exactly one spot in the game that is designed, you can tell they laid it out this way on purpose for grinding, is that in the World of Evil, there's those floating glass wall things that are literally just glass rectangles that like roll end over end, and they drop an unreal amount of experience. And there's a bunch of them right near a door, and there's a little loop you can walk. You start at the door, you kill like 6 of them, and then you go through the door, and then you come right back through, and you just walk the loop again. And that is the only spot in the game where grinding is feasible and would be effective if you did it. And it's literally the room right before the final boss. So if you are unable to beat the final boss being the level and power that they designed for you to be with the fixed amount of monsters that are in the universe, there and only there could you choose to grind. And for some reason, maybe it's just because I played a lot of JRPGs as a person, because I still do. Maybe it's just because I play a lot of JRPGs, but I found that amount of attention to detail in the experience you have at any given time, and then giving you this one little tiny bastion of grinding if you need it, because you just can't overcome the last boss, to be sort of brilliant. Like, it's this incredible attention to detail, because you couldn't do that in the Zelda universe. It would be really weird if it's like, oh, right before you fight Ganon, if you want, there's 20 extra hearts that you can just go pick up. Like, that would feel like cheating. It'd just be like, oh, why in this room right before Ganon is there a bunch of extra life? But being able to grind for experience by defeating monsters, even though they're weird glass rectangles, like, that feels earned. So it's like they're giving you an out if you need it, but they don't want you to need it. They want you to be a specific level, a specific amount of health, and the boss is tuned for that. But here's an out if you need it.
Well, and that's the thing, though, is that they raised the cost of entry for the out to the point where you will you will only do that if you need it. You know, so basically, it's a way to ratchet down the difficulty, right? It's a way to go from normal difficulty to easy mode if you have to, right? But the thing is, it's like, you know, you are way more likely to like fight the boss and, you know, get rocked, and then you fight the boss again and get rocked. You'd be like, do I need to grind and level up? No, I'll try one more time, and then maybe you beat him that time, you know. But it's literally, because it's not just a, hey sucker, you suck at this, you want to suck it on easy mode or whatever. Like, it's not that. It's like, you know, literally the player is self-limiting in the fact that they are more likely to gravitate towards the experience the designers intended to have, instead of like doing it the quote unquote easy way. And so then they will, and the thing is, they're only going to grind to the point where they can just barely beat the boss, which is what the experience the designers decided to have. So it is actually very elegant game design in my own humble opinion.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that I'm not sure, again, like, I can't think of another great example of, here's a game that uses levels and experience, but really the levels and experience kind of don't matter because the game controls the level you're at through some mechanism at any given time, right?
Kirby's Epic Yarn.
Exactly like that, yes.
Yeah.
Man, level 99 Kirby, though, is just the best. But
that's
then...
that's when he turns into Sonic. Just like Super Sonic, you know. I don't know why those two things are related.
I don't know, but I would play that game. I would grind up that Kirby. But I really like this idea of, we have designed an experience that we've play tested and we are fairly convinced is balanced. But if we're wrong, if you made it this far and the balance was off just enough that the cumulative effect of it being off is that you can't finish the game, we'd really rather you finish the game. So here's your pressure release valve, right? You don't get access to it until the very last minute. I mean, you could begrudgingly do it earlier, but you don't really get access to the pressure release valve until the very last minute. And it's just, I can't think of a better word for it. It just feels thoughtful. Like, it's a very thoughtful that they're like, we did our best. We really think we made a fair experience, but just in case we're wrong, here you go.
Right. There are a bajillion different mechanics, but I know we're starting to run a little long. What do you have anything that you need to get in there?
No, I really wanted to just talk about that experience thing, because once I put it all together in my mind, like how it was different from either a game with no experience like a Zelda or a game with only experience like a Final Fantasy, I was like, ooh, this is...
Oh.
Yeah, this is not only clever, this is maybe more games should try to do this. Here's our highly balanced experience, but just in case we screwed it up, here's your pressure release valve. Like, that's... And maybe other games have chosen to do that in other clever ways, but doing it through levels just felt like really thoughtful and kind of on point for the universe. I will quickly rapid fire a few mechanical things at you because they don't require deep discussions, but just that I noticed and appreciated. This universe has no money.
Boom! Lightning
people-
round. Go. Yeah.
Yeah,
Universe
people
has more money.
people give you stuff for free because they know you're trying to save the world, which is how everyone in every RPG should treat the hero.
Agreed.
They make you do a little bit of backtracking, but it's not they don't like drag it out so you don't feel angry at them for making you backtrack to the earlier levels so that you could defeat the metal monsters with the metal swords. It feels like a good reason to have backtracking.
It feels like a good reason for backtracking, and the fact that your backtracking gives you an idea for how much more powerful you've become. So it's not just the numbers getting bigger; it actually gives you a framing device for your power in the level. Boom! Next one.
Boom. Where is it? I got lost in my own notes here.
Damn it! Come on, man.
I like
Lightning round.
I like that the save spots are also the same tool you use to navigate the world. You just have your 3 little exit stamps and then where you save to talk to the master. Like it's just, I don't need a transportation mechanic and a save mechanic when you can elegantly combine them in this way. And a lot of later RPGs have done this by making their save spots like teleportation stones. Like this, if you're going to give me a big sprawling world, like don't spread out all of my concerns, consolidate those as much as possible. And then my final one, oh, sorry. Do you want to boom?
Boom!
Thank you. My final one is this game commits a grievous sin in my mind of all action RPGs, which is having some items that are auto use and some that are not, and it's not clear
Correct.
why that is.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I tried to use that medical herb so many times. I was like, why isn't this working? Oh, wait, no, I have to die first.
Yeah. And that one, like the medical herb always gives you full health, so it's nice, but it's not nice that it has to be equipped, which means if you have like the power bracelet, you can't use the power bracelet because you have to equip the medical herb, which means you play a dangerous game of cat and mouse or chicken, where you're like, can I equip the medical herb right before I die so that I can have the power bracelet on as long as possible? And then later, when you get the platinum card and use it to go into the dungeon, do you have to equip the platinum card? No, the guy just acknowledges that you're carrying it. Why don't other people acknowledge other things that I'm carrying? Why do I have to take the mushroom shoes off in the mountain level? Can't I just leave the mushroom shoes on all the time? There's no other shoes that I ever need to equip. Like, if you're going to have some items that work passively and you're going to have some items that require player action, give me a reason that those things are different. I'm not saying it has to be all one way or the other. I just need to understand why an item is in one category or the other.
Boom! End of lightning round.
Did you have an app already that did that? Or in the time I was complaining, were you able to find an app?
I would really love to say I found an app for that, but we are and my son will love this because this is a great story. We're at that fun part of potty training where like 90% of the time like it's all okay, but then sometimes there are accidents. So whenever he successfully uses the bathroom, we go like, Teddy peed on the potty, and then we hit the DJ horn, and we have a little like DJ dance party. So that is why I have a DJ horn on my phone.
That I'm 100% on board with that explanation.
So with all that said, does it hold up?
So I came into this with a firm no nostalgia goggles required, and I am going to hold at no nostalgia goggles required, but with the caveat of being aware that this game is doing some weird things on purpose, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some of the themes, some of the mechanics, some of the visuals and the audio, like they are weird, but many of them, but I would go so far as to even say most of them are not accidents. They made intentional, interesting design choices to try and make a different kind of experience. And I think if you go into a modern game or a modern movie or a modern book that's trying to be weird on purpose, like that's trying to be avant-garde, it's really not that different than if you go into a classic game or movie or book that is trying to be avant-garde, right? It's Pomo. It's weird for the sake of weird, right? But because they were so thoughtful about their decisions, and because they weren't really trying to be weird for the sake of weird, they were trying to do something interesting. And some of those ideas turned out to be good ideas, and some of them didn't. But I think the overall package does not require having played it as a child. I think you just what you do need to know is this game is not like every other action RPG. Some of the things about it are weird, but they're weird on purpose. So
right.
I'm going to call it a no nostalgia goggles, but it's like with the tiny asterisk of like, but it's weird. If you don't like weird experimental games, maybe don't play it.
Yeah, no, for me, I was like, no, I agree with you. No nostalgia goggles required, but ooh, man, like it's just it's right. Like I was like at first, I was like, when I was first playing it, I was dealing with the combat. I was like, gosh, this is awful. Yeah, I have nostalgia goggles, but I got into it a little bit more, and I was like, yeah, maybe nostalgia monocle. And then you kind of got to the end. I was like, no, I don't think you need nostalgia goggles, but you almost do. You're like 20/60 vision. Like you can pass that eye exam, but man, like only when you like squint your left eye and then squint your right eye and then figure out what the blur means. Like right on that area.
You can tell the optometrist feels a little guilty letting you drive out of there, but they're like, well, he drove here.
So it's probably fine. It's probably fine. But yeah, and my big thing for this though is that, instead of making the bajillionth Mario or whatever, why don't they remake these games like ActRaiser and
Oh my god. Okay. You probably had a way you were going to end that sentence on your own, but I'm ending it for you. So, at my job, we have like a little, water cooler channel in our Slack that's all about video games. And Sega and some development shop, I don't know, it doesn't matter. They literally just announced being released in July. So as of the time of this recording, like 3 weeks away, they just announced a spiritual successor to ActRaiser.
Well, I mean, we got to play that.
Yes, we do got to play that. No, like awesome. I watched the trailer and I was just like, oh man, this kind of looks and feels like ActRaiser, but some of that could just be a coincidence. And then I read the press release and I mean, they just wore their heart right out on their sleeve. They were just like, we wanted to make a spiritual successor to ActRaiser. And I was like, yes, because Sega does not have a perfect track record of making good games, but they've made some pretty freaking solid games in their career. And it's not like they're making money off consoles anymore. So I agree with what I think you were getting at, which is try things that are new and interesting and then refine them. Don't just try it once. Don't be like the friggin' Wile E. Coyote. Don't try an idea once and then never try it again like a cartoon character. Right. You need to experiment and then adjust and refine the experiment. And this kind of game, the Melancholy Quintet, ActRaiser, Soul Blazer, Illusion of Gaia, Terranigma, like there just aren't a ton of games like that anymore that take an established formula and are like, what if we just change it a little bit? Right. I mean, that's a good, another good example of that is Hideo Kojima, the guy who made Metal Gear Solid. He really wanted to make movies, but he kind of ended up making video games. And so like, there's a lot of cutscenes in Metal Gear Solid. Like it's worth it. It doesn't feel like a chore, like clearing a monster lair, but like, it's kind of like playing a movie. So you and I should play that movie. We should play Metal Gear Solid.
Dude, I am 100% down for playing Metal Gear, man. Like, because I've heard a lot of good things about Metal Gear. It's an older game, and I'm surprised that you're mentioning it from a cinematic standpoint, because I'm not sure that the hardware would have like been up for that. But dude, I mean, you know me, I'm totally down for new experiences. Let's play some Metal Gear.
Right. So there's a lot of games in the series, so we're gonna play. It's one of the middle ones.
Right. Yeah. No, definitely. I agree completely. We should play Metal Gear. But to sum it all up, I really loved this game. It was really great. I really loved Chrono Trigger.
The curtain falls. The music plays. The credits roll. Then it all fades to black. And you're left by yourself. The fanfare is gone. There's no player two. There by your side to share victories won. But as you slowly progress down the hall to your bed, a few great events leak back into your head from the time that you spent traversing the land, battling evil, fighting the darkness, just sword in hand. Your memories creeping with the edge of a smile. You realize again what you lost for a while. You're gonna think back much less.